Did we ever find out if that picture from Rupert, it was photoshopped. It looked like he was hooking into the field and there was this whole matrix over the top of his head. So anyway, we sort of, if those of you who have the visual gift of being able to see things, if you look out right now, you can see all the sparkles over your heads right now. Anyway, you know, we come from California. They always call it the land of the fruits and the nuts. I'm not sure if we're the fruity ones or the nutty ones, but we really are happy to be here, and we're glad that we were invited. Carl Dawson, we actually met in the Netherlands, and it was talked about a couple years ago that we were going to be here, and here we are. So it's nice to have this chance.
So we've had a couple of days of one day anyway, of some very interesting philosophical talks, and today we're going to see where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We're going to see what the brainwaves look like, and we're going to give you a crash course in brainwaves, so that you know what you're looking at, hopefully. And we have our little sign up here saying, enlightenment is an accident, meditation makes you more accident prone. And the original research that we are working with came out of meditation here in England, in Ilkley, with Max Cade, who developed the Mind Mirror, which is the EEG equipment we're using. And Anna Wise, his student and protege, took that to the United States, and we studied with her for about 12 years. And so we've had a lot of experience looking at brainwaves, and what we're going to do now is we're going to hook up Ted and Sam, and we're going to look at their brains as they're doing some matrix work, and we're going to point out to you what's happening and what we're seeing, and hopefully that will give you some enlightenment as to the processes that you're working with.
About 6 years ago, I attended a very small group of people with Gary Craig in California. It was only 10 of us that were EFT practitioners who were invited to this little group to actually test what surrogate tapping would do. And he was using himself as a subject, and all 10 of us got to be subjects. And so I happened to have my Brainwave EEG equipment with me in the trunk of the car. And I said to Gary Craig about halfway through the day when we were testing surrogate tapping, would you like to see what that looks like with the real time of the brain waves on TV, where you can actually see what's happening when we're doing this on the person that's not being tapped on? He goes, oh, can we do that? I go, yeah, I'll go get the equipment. So I hooked somebody up, and about halfway through that session of watching someone's changes happening in real time without ever touching them at all, he just looked over at me and he said, could you put a little white coat on and stand up on stage and show this to the whole master class in Boston? Oh, sure, we'll wear white coats. So we both wore white coats, and we stood up there with Gary Craig and showed everyone how it was done. And ever since then, this is the little demonstration that we've been doing. Now, David McKay did a demonstration of matrix reimprinting down in Mexico last year, where we were hooking both he and the subject up, and we saw some amazing changes. The main change that we're going to be showing you is the difference between adult brainwaves and child brainwaves, and how that is going to be different when you're in the matrix with a very young child. So first of all, while I'm hooking up Ted, Gary is going to explain a little bit more about what it is you're going to be watching for, so you won't be completely in the dark.
Okay, so don't be afraid to raise your hands if you don't understand what I'm talking about. Because sometimes I don't understand it either. So we, you know, it's interesting going to neurofeedback conferences. You get to hear all of these people talking about all these strange subjects and brainwaves and QEEGs and all of these different things that they do. And then afterwards, everybody's sitting around the table saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. So no one really understands what's happening in the brain. And we've heard, you know, the last with Rupert Sheldrake and Lynn McTaggart, what we have heard is that the mind may not be in the brain. And so what we're looking at here is an EEG. And the best we can say is the EEG correlates with certain types of behaviors, certain types of thoughts. We can't say that the mind is in the brain or consciousness is in the brain. These are not things that we actually understand yet. But we do know that the EEG correlates quite closely with a lot of behaviors, with your thinking, with your feelings, with your behaviors, movements, and so on. So what we're going to look at here is, this is splayed beta. And what you're looking at, let me get my pointer here, and we'll go through this a little bit more in some other slides. But let's see, which one of these do I push to get this to work here? The middle one. Yeah, no, nothing's happening. Nope, not that one. Nope, nope. That's turned on. Not that it matters.
Manually for a second.
Yeah. So anyway, at the very top, in the red bars up there, are what we call beta. And the upper beta, if you're looking at, this is the screen we're going to be looking at. No, I just need this to work. What's on the USB? Oh, okay, we have to, I see. He's pointing it at me. It's making me nervous. Which one do you want? Okay. What do you want to do?
Do you want to move forward and backwards?
No, I want to stay right there. Okay. It should work now.
If not, just do it back.
Yeah. Doesn't want to point. Anyway. Oh dear, I didn't want to do that. Let's go back here. Yeah, too far back. Okay. So what we're talking about, if you're looking at this screen, which is what we'll be looking at, if you look up the center bar, you see some numbers going up the center, and it goes from about 0.75 up to 38. These are what are called hertz. These are cycles per second. This is how fast your brainwave is. And if you think about brainwaves as sort of like water hitting a beach, we have waves coming in, and they're coming in at a certain rate. And these are the cycles per second. So we get, maybe 5 waves every second or 38 waves every second, something like that. And you look at the lights up here, most of you know that in Europe and Britain, I believe it's in Britain also, it's 50 cycles per second. These lights are actually flashing on and off. In the US, it's 60 cycles a second. So that's what we're looking at, is the number of waves coming in every second. And that's what's being measured up and down the middle. And if you look at it horizontally, the width, this far apart, is the amplitude. That's how big the wave is, how much energy is in the waves. Now we change the settings occasionally, and we'll let you know when we do that. We kind of zoom in and we zoom out, depending on how much energy is in the waves. If it gets too big, we have to zoom out a little bit to look at it. If it gets too small, we zoom in again and change our amplitude settings. So the red is the beta. The next sort of yellow gold is alpha. The blue, we color-coded this to make it easier to see it. The blue, they don't normally look like this. The blue is theta, and then the green is delta. So we'll go through each one of those separately. Okay, there's our beta. Now at the very top, now how many have heard of gamma? Okay, good, everybody's heard of gamma. We don't know too much about gamma. It changes. When I first started doing EEG work, gamma started at 40 cycles a second or 40 hertz and on up. And then they kept changing the sort of the goalpost, and gamma kept dropping down. So beta became gamma, lower gamma, and we begin to get all these changes in sort of the nomenclature of things. So it gets very confusing after a while. And when I start reading articles and someone says we get gamma, I have to know exactly what frequencies they're talking about, because it could be, all over the map. 13 to 15 cycles per second. This is what we're looking for in people. This is a calm state, not too much anxiety there. But when you go up into the higher frequencies up here at 38 cycles per second, often that's associated with emotional content. Sometimes the monkey mind. is up there, we call monkey mind. 16 to 20 hertz is also the area that we're looking for, and that is, as we're saying, the area that we do problem solving. So what we want to do is maintain kind of these lower beta frequencies, what we call beta 1.
Can everyone see the numbers up there? 15, 19, 24?
Yeah.
Can you see those? Because we're talking about the lower two bars are good beta, but the upper two ones, the very top ones, are usually associated with too much busyness in the mind.
So, you know, we're taking 15 there is kind of a crossover between alpha and beta, but it's normally considered to be in the beta range. And that area from about 12 up to maybe 20 cycles per second is what we want to maintain, because that's calm, alert awareness. You can do problem solving, you can think about things, you know what's happening in terms of creativity and so on. And we want to look at reducing that upper beta, or the upper gamma now, what they call gamma, because as you can see, the gamma used to be beta 2, and gamma now starts at about 24 and goes up from there. So is that totally confusing?
So
Probably.
what the main important part of this is for all of you doing matrix reimprinting is that this upper beta will not be as evident when you're working with a child under the age of even 10, 11, or 12. It will be lower.
And I think Carl mentioned that when we're born, we're in delta. We're in that very slow rhythm. Maybe for the first year or so, delta is the dominant rhythm. And then as we get a little bit older, theta from about 1 or 2 years of age up to 5 or 6 becomes the dominant rhythm. And then it begins to get a little bit faster into the alpha and into the beta range as we get older. If you stop to think about that, what we call state-dependent learning, as we begin to learn things as a child, a lot of those memories are laid down in those delta and theta rhythms. And unless you can re-access those rhythms, it's difficult to re-access the memories. So this is why we see when we start working in matrix and we start working with children, we begin to see the theta coming back out again, we can see the delta coming back out again, and people begin to remember even their birth as those memories start to come up again. So, you know, the different frequencies, now let's say that this is not written in stone. The things that we're talking about up here, about, say, 19 to 23 being emotional intensity, maybe. But usually we see emotional intensity in that range. When we get up into the 24 and 38 range, the very top bars, that's often associated with that negative worry, anxiety, things like that going on. So when you're looking at these various bars, kind of pay attention to what the person is saying and what they're feeling and what sort of energy frequencies we're looking at.
What you'll often see is when you're doing a session and you're hooked up, the new aspect, if a new situation or a new memory is arising, you'll get this sudden upper flare at the top, which will be the monkey, you know, just telling you there's something there. Okay. And then the next one is alpha. So alpha is the bridge. Alpha is the bridge. If you were to say the beta we were just talking about is the conscious mind, where you're really alert and awake, and you're operating just like most of us are right now because it's early enough in the morning, we're not half asleep yet. The alpha is the one that will bridge the gap between the conscious mind at the top and the subconscious at the bottom. So without the alpha, it's really hard to access anything that's coming up from the deeper subconscious or the unconscious itself. In some cases, the really low unconscious, which is almost like connecting up into the field. And also the alpha is the one that has the most to do with sensualization. So that's a word that just encompasses all of the senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, kinesthetic, proprioceptive, movement, and so forth. Kinesthetic people have a lot of alpha a lot of times just because they stay in touch with their senses a lot. So it's a more relaxed alpha. It's a little bit like just closing your eyes and taking a deep breath. That will take you into alpha pretty easily. It used to be in the 60s and the 70s, everybody was talking about the alpha waves and how if you were going to really get into meditation, you just needed to be in alpha. Well, come to find out, you could get into alpha just watching TV. So it wasn't always, now we know it's not the end-all be-all, it's just a bridge.
It just reminded me, Donna was talking about a story of, I think it was Richard Davidson was over he's a neuroscientist, over in Tibet, and they were hooking up the Tibetans over there. The Dalai Lama had sort of, let's say, encouraged some of the monks over there to get hooked up. And so they were putting on this huge array of electrodes. Now we only use a few, we've only got 5 electrodes on, but he was putting on like over 100 electrodes. So you've probably seen these fishnet sort of electrodes in some of these pictures. And the monks all started laughing. And he thought, well, this is, this looks silly, this looks funny to the monks with all this stuff on the head. And, they kept laughing and laughing. And he said, well, what are you laughing at? And they said, well, you're hooking it up all wrong. He said that the mind is not in your head, it's in your heart. So, we have this cultural bias over here of our mind being in our heads, where elsewhere they don't believe that. They think the heart is the center of your mind. Let's see, did we cover alpha pretty good? I think we covered that pretty good. Go down one more step. Theta is your subconscious. And as you start to fall asleep, you'll start to go into theta. So right as you're falling asleep at night, and this is why it's difficult sometimes to meditate. You'll start to meditate, and if you're tired to begin with, you'll fall asleep because you're going through alpha and down into theta, and this is we're conditioned to fall asleep at that point. And meditation is about training your awareness so that you can hold that awareness and drop down through alpha and into theta. And as Donna was saying, alpha is about centralization. And so you might think about that when you're working with people. Someone will say, I can't see anything. And you try and encourage them to see things and see things. Some people don't access theta or alpha visually. They access it through hearing. Now, if you say someone who's a visual alpha, you say, okay, see something, and they close their eyes, and they'll see something very intensely. But if you have someone that accesses it auditorily, they're not going to see anything. So you want them to start hearing something. Can you hear someone talking? Can you hear the wind blowing? Can you hear a bird chirping? Can you hear something going on? And then they begin to access, possibly even visually, what's happening to them. Also, some people, as Donna was saying, are kinesthetic alpha. They need to start moving in their mind. They need to start walking. They need to start feeling things against their skin, someone touching them, picking them up. Maybe as an infant or as a young child, they can feel their parents picking them up or something happening to them that way. And they begin to access their alpha. They begin to access that alpha bridge, and then the memories that are in theta begin to come up. Theta is where your creative mind is. Theta is where you do all your problem solving. It's that point where you're working on say on a problem for days or weeks or years sometimes. Nothing seems to come, and then you lie down, you start falling asleep, and all of a sudden you have that, aha, now I see, now I get it. Or you wake up in the morning. As you wake up in the morning, you go through theta and alpha, and that information pops up into your head, and you get it.
Or sometimes when you're just soaking in the bathtub, you come up with the idea.
So these are just some of the things that we see in theta, 7.5, 8.5, visualization. That's where you get into strong, almost dreamlike imagery. If you're deeply into theta and you have a good alpha bridge, you may have almost visual, dreamlike imagery. It'll be very intense.
And when this theta goes out pretty wide and it's in combination with only alpha and some delta, then we know we're working with the inner child.
And so if you drop down further into 3.5 hertz down there, that's when you begin to tune out. And this is another thing that happens in meditation, is that people will lose that alpha bridge and they'll drop into theta. they know they're conscious. They know something is happening. And they come back up again and they'll say, I had a great time, I don't remember a thing. You know, it was just wonderful down there, I felt really great, but nothing happened. And this is usually because they've lost that alpha bridge in there. And so nothing is coming up. And this, again, is when we work with meditation states, people will begin dropping into theta, and the emotional memories will start coming up. And this is why we need techniques like matrix reimprinting or EFT or some of the energy psychologies to have a tool so that the people can go, when these emotional issues start rising up and popping up in meditations, rather than just sitting there and saying, okay, I'm going to ignore this, you know, I'm just going to let it go and it'll flow through, and you know, emotions don't do that to you often, as you know, they just grab you and you're sucked into the emotion, and so you need some sort of tool where you can stop and, you know, work through that, and then you can go back down again and bring something else up.
This is delta, and delta is the one that's the one we see in infants, and if it's the very low delta, way down here, it means that sometimes it's coming back from even birth experiences, because the in utero brain waves are sub-delta, they're very slow, and it's possible that when you're also working with delta, you're hooking into the field. So that whole realm of kind of the handshake to the divine is coming through delta. A lot of people who walk around with their eyes open, doing things or doing sessions, or usually anybody who's really good at doing matrix reimprinting or EFT or other kinds of energy work like Reiki, when we hook them up, even when they're working and their eyes are open and they're thinking about other things, they'll have this huge, wide delta band, which is the reason why they're very empathic, very compassionate. They can feel what's going on in the other person, and they can hook in using that delta as the way to connect to other people or to connect to the other information that's out in the field.
For people who are working in heart math, the heart incoherence is beating in delta and subdelta frequencies. It's producing that rhythm. And so it is connecting with that rhythm in the brain as well. So this is often why you have, with good coherence, you'll have good compassionate relationship with other people. And that field, how many people are familiar with heart math? Oh,
great.
Okay, great.
So the heart is actually putting out about 100 times more electrical impulses than the brain does. And so it is actually dependent on the heart rhythms and the heart electricity to fuel its power. It's almost as if the brain waves are riding on top of the heart waves, almost like a big whale with a smaller fish riding on top of the whale. So the heart is the whale and the brain is the smaller fish.
And so I think of the heart as basically the conductor of an orchestra, and all of your internal organs are the different sections of the symphony. And when the heart gets into coherence, all of the rhythms of the body follow along, and they get into this nice rhythm with the heart and the brain as well. Now, one thing I've seen in heart math, and I'm not, I'd have to talk to them about it, but they're saying, you know, when the heart gets into coherence, you get into alpha. And I have sort of the opposite viewpoint, is that it's the alpha that helps you get into coherence. So, you know, we'll have to kind of work that one out with them someday. Were there any questions so far? We've gone over.
Questions.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about the significance of how wide the band is, the energy?
Yes.
How do you interpret?
Most of the time, the energy is what we measure in microvolts. Okay, so most of the time, let's say with 5 to 10 microvolts is the energy of the brain. But sometimes, as Donna was talking about, when we're looking at healers and they begin to heal, that delta will come out. Now we can measure out to 500 microvolts on our system. And sometimes it will go all the way to the edge all the way to the 500 microvolts, so it might even be further out than that. So there's a tremendous amount of energy that's being put out. And I believe that the delta is related to chi, to that kind of energy field. It also connects you empathically with the outside world. We see this in two different situations. One of them is with children who've been abused. And that delta is out there kind of like radar. It's sort of sensing what's going on around you. So we see a lot of delta there. When you get into adulthood, that delta is still there. It's still kind of like, is it okay? Is it safe? You know, what's happening in the room? You ever had that experience when you walk into a room and you just know what's happening, or something's wrong, or, you know, it doesn't feel quite right to you? That's probably that delta, childhood delta, reaching out for you and bringing that information up. Now it's totally kinesthetic. It's in your body. As Candace Pert said, the body is the unconscious, and the delta is your true unconscious.
Which is interesting that there are so many people who are healers who have had early childhood wounds, who then have big delta, and who it's actually turned into a gift. What was your question?
Would this be associated with the more psychic clairaudience?
Yes, the question was, would this delta be connected to those who are psychic or clairaudient or clairvisual? And yes, the answer is yes. A lot of people who have those kinds of psychic abilities, who pick up on things that they shouldn't know, have huge delta, and that's where it's coming from.
And yeah, another thing about the psychic abilities is that we see, now we're talking about gamma, and I didn't go into gamma very much because it's still a sort of a new field, but gamma is that high frequency that's above 40 hertz, above 40 cycles per second. You can go up to 200 cycles per second. And they found this in Buddhist meditators who are doing empathic or compassion meditation. But it was a type that is not associated with anything or anyone in particular, sort of an open feeling of compassion, Tonglen type of meditation. You're just sort of taking in the suffering of the world and giving back out a healing energy. And these Buddhist meditators had very high gamma, higher than what we normally see in, let's say, your average person off the street. Now, gamma is associated also with focused attention. So if you're in, now what we like to look at are, say, the 40 cycles up to 45 cycles per second. What you see there is, say, a person standing on a balance board and trying to balance, you'll see a lot more of that gamma and that frequency. And that frequency is associated with that focused attention, because if you're trying to balance on a balance board, you're very focused. You'll also see just people who are just, concentrating, focusing on one thing and having that. You'll see that higher frequency. Now, gamma is said to tie together various areas of the brain. What we're finding is that the gamma, which is coming out, let's say, at per second or 45 cycles per second, some area of the brain, it ties together the small area of the brain. But those very fast frequencies don't have the ability to spread throughout the brain. What's actually spreading that is the theta rhythm. And the theta rhythm is underneath that gamma. So what you're getting is these little bursts of gamma coming out, say, at 5 cycles a second in the theta range. So they're kind of little burst, 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 burst. And that theta rhythm carries that gamma throughout the rest of the brain and ties lots of areas together at the same time.
I just want to clarify one thing about high focus. When I was in the field, Tom Allen and some others were focused on 40 hertz training at around 40 hertz.
Right.
And their idea was kind of an entrainment, but the entrainment was not for focus. It was for enlightened states and how to function on that
Right.
level. Whereas SMR frequency, Barry Sterling discovered that, was the cat frequency. In other words, a cat's ability to stand still and focus
Right.
is because a cat has a lot of SMR frequency. So SMR and the lower beta was the area of learning skills and high focus, whereas 40 hertz, way back in the beginning, was the frequency of, like you said, the gurus, but with an entrainment for enlightened state. Are you saying that changed?
Well, we're not cats. And, you know, the cats have, you know, different sorts of frequencies than we have. We look at horses, we look at cats, we look at giraffes. They all have different sorts of frequencies than we have. I mean, their brain waves are still doing what we do, but their dominant frequencies change. And so for a cat being highly focused, that SMR is associated with the muscles and with balance, and they're just standing there, you know, totally quiet, you know, waiting for that mouse to move so they can grab it. Humans also do that sort of thing, but when we are focused intellectually, you know, our attention is frequently in that gamma range, that 40 hertz. And so we, you know, function a little bit differently that way. Again, I think we're sort of over-interpreting gamma at the moment, sort of like what we did with alpha back in the 60s. You know, alpha was going to be the rhythm of enlightenment, you know, just produce alpha and, you know, everything was great. I think gamma is something that we need to look at a lot more closely than we have.
There's a man called Matthew Manning. He's a very famous, powerful psychic healer.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently when he's healing, and they've done this in laboratories, he produces Kappa Waves, K-A-P-P-A. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, and it's sort of an unusual frequency.
Yeah, and apparently he said it's connected to the primitive brain.
Yeah.
Okay. We were being asked about Kappa waves, and Kappa waves are something that is unusual. Yes.
And it's not something that we're looking at.
We don't have a way to measure that.
Yeah. I think that how
We
we're
should
doing
go
on
on to,
time
we
there.
should go on to the
Yeah,
next
we-
thing, because we need to do
Maybe
the,
you want to get the guys.
yeah, we need to get them hooked up.
Yeah, we need to.
Okay, let's just go on with, this is the way a meditation state usually is when it's really deep. You'll notice that all the beta at the top is missing, and that's someone who is sitting on their pillow just doing a deep meditation, and they don't have a lot of thought about it, and they have a nice experience, but it's not a state where you can be very aware of what's going on.
Because the beta has disappeared here, it doesn't mean that it's gone. Okay, there's still beta there, but the amplitude has gone down so small that we're not really measuring it in order to see the other frequencies here. We also see another state where it looks like everything's disappeared. It's the amplitude has gotten so small that we're not really measuring it anymore, so it almost looks like they're flatlined, they're not dead. We often see that in people who go out of body. People who are disassociated, or people who actually are able to, let's say, astral project or go out of body. Shamans, we see that frequently in shamans. They'll go into the underworld, and all of a sudden their amplitude is gone. And as long as they're down there speaking with the spirits and doing whatever they need to do, you know, they're very small amplitude, and then they'll come back up again. Okay, this is what we like to look for, and pay attention when things are happening. This is what we call the awakened mind. We have access here to all of the information that the brain contains.
Up the top.
So you see the upper beta there is reduced. We still have the sort of middle beta there that allows us to be aware of what's coming up and to creatively work with it if we need to. We have a nice alpha band, which is that ability to bridge to the subconscious material. Theta is coming out there, so the unconscious material is starting to come up, or the subconscious material. And then there's some delta.
And sometimes the delta can come way out to the edge here on this. You can have this awakened mind pattern where everything is flowing with or without a lot of delta, just depending on the person.
So this is an ideal state of creativity, of the aha experience, of getting personal insight, spiritual transformation. The more you can hold this state, the easier it is to come up with these, let's say, transformative states that we're looking for, whether it's emotional or spiritual.
This is just a snapshot. It's holding still. When you see it, it's going to be more like when Carl was showing yesterday where it was an animated version, that's the way it's going to look. It's going to go in and out of something like this. But when you're watching the session, when we bring the subjects up here to actually do the session, you will be seeing it flashing, and just keep your eye out for something that looks like this, where the middle band of alpha and theta is getting bigger, and it looks a little bit like a gingerbread man, with big arms and a small head.
Now we
That's
see
what you're
this,
gonna be watching for.
we often see this in meditators, people who've been long-term meditators. We see this in highly creative people. Some people, they'll just close their eyes and automatically go into this state. They're few and far between. Most of us will have that kind of monkey mind, that sort of hourglass shape that I showed you at the beginning. And we have to learn how to do this. And this is what we do in our workshop, is that we begin to train you how to develop this particular pattern. And we'll go into more detail on that in the workshop. Now, this is a pattern that we would hope that a lot of people will experience. This is what Donna calls the Bliss Ball. This is a state where we're completely open to everything. And it's always associated with a positive experience.
People will be sitting there with a big smile on their face.
It's never associated with any sort of negativity, okay? And it comes up with a feeling of, it's complete, I'm complete, I don't have to do anything anymore. A sense of peace, a sense of oneness, a sense of joy, and actually, sometimes a deep sense of bliss. And people have tears streaming down their cheeks. And this is, how many are familiar with core transformation in NLP? A few of you. How many are familiar with Genlin's focusing process? Just even fewer. These are processes that allow you to develop the awakened mind and drop into this bliss ball state, this evolved mind state.
And matrix re-imprinting does do the same thing. We saw this happen several times already with, so we're looking forward to seeing someone this morning. We'll see where we bring them to this.
So when emotions begin to clear and everything is, in harmony, let's say, look for a bliss ball. But it may only happen for a few seconds.
It just kind of goes poof.
Okay?
I
I think that's about it.
Okay, that's just our email address, website, if you want to write that down, awaken-mind.com. So now go ahead and let's bring up the